Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Seth Gruber, who is a pro-life advocate that I stumbled upon when one of his clips went viral on the internet, and I wanted to have him on and understand more about what he thinks. And so in this conversation, we unpack his belief system and why he is such a staunch advocate for the right to life for unborn children. He's also the author of the 1916 Project, which is a book and a film that will be released shortly here, and links to those are down there in the description. We had some technical issues and scheduling snafus happen, so this is kind of a half of a conversation, and I'll have him back on to get even deeper into what he believes and why he believes it so strongly. As always, if you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the tip jars below. Without further ado, here is Seth Gruber.
I've been involved in, I guess, the pro-life movement, trying to tell people we shouldn't kill babies. It's not a good idea. I don't know. There's this thing called the right to life. And if you don't have it when you become human, then when do you get it? See what I mean? And if it's not when you become human, then it's really left up to the state. When to determine the beginning and genesis of human rights. Think about this. When Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973, Benjamin, being human was no longer enough to have human rights. Think about that. Being human is no longer enough to have human rights. Well, if that's not where human rights come from, that you're a human, then when does it begin? I mean, every secular bioethicist admits secular, non-Christian, non-religious bioethicist. By the way, I think actually all human conflict is ultimately theological. So I think non-religious people are super religious. It's just called paganism, but we can talk about that later. But every secular bioethicist admits that human life begins at the moment of conception. And so if you don't begin the right to life there, you actually hand over power to the state to define for us what we used to allow the natural world and human nature to define for us. Happy to get into all of that. I've just been involved in that fight for basically my whole life. I've been a pro-life activist since I was a fetus. My mother was the executive director of a pregnancy resource center. And for your listeners, there's about 3,000 of these in America. And they provide free resources, ultrasounds, medical. Many of them are fully medical, actually. They do the things that Planned Parenthood says they do. Planned Parenthood says they do breast exams and pap smears. They don't. These pregnancy resource centers do many of these. STD testing, parenting classes, material assistance, sometimes financial help. Sometimes some of them run maternity homes to house women who are on the outs and don't have a place to live, or there's a degenerate deadbeat dad or boyfriend. So my mom ran one of those pregnancy centers in the late 1980s, early 1990s in Los Angeles County. I was born in 1991, but my mom was pregnant with me, waddling around the pregnancy center, loving on moms and helping save babies when I was in the womb. So I guess if it's her body, her choice, Benjamin, and there's only one body, the mother's, and there is no other body, because that's why they say my body, my choice, and not our body's my choice, then I guess every part of the baby's part of the mother, because there actually is no baby, because it's just her body, which I guess means I was my mother's body. Which I guess means I saved those babies too. So I've been a pro-life activist since I was a fetus. That's the family background. And then I was homeschooled through 8th grade. I went to public high school. I did my senior project on abortion because I felt like I didn't have good answers for my beliefs to some of my pro-abortion friends. And Whittier High School in Los Angeles County, Richard Nixon's alma mater, told me I couldn't pick the topic of abortion, but they didn't know I was homeschooled. So I threatened to sue them for viewpoint discrimination by telling me I couldn't pick the topic of abortion. I threatened to sue the entire high school district. So they backed off real quick, and I did my senior project on abortion. And that was when, at 18 years old in 2009, I saw aborted baby imagery of children who were aborted in the first trimester. So 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10-week-old children. At the stage of development that there's the most public support for abortion, and at the stage of development at which over 90% of abortions occur, and at the stage of development we're largely told by the culture it's just an insensate blob of non-person tissue. And at 18 years old, as a senior in high school, I was looking at eyeballs, lips, noses, hands, feet of dismembered and dissected babies that looked very human. And
Wait,
that was
images of, or like first person?
Images okay. Taken, pictures taken of first trimester aborted babies. And that was a real turning point for me.
Yeah. So one aspect of the abortion, or just conceptualizing abortion, is this notion of individual personhood. You brought up human rights. Can you speak to the history of these ideas and where they split off from their founding in a Christian society? That's where liberalism comes from. So what's the descendancy of these ideas? And where they branch off for you?
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Benjamin. I talk about a lot of that in my book, The 1916 Project. The subtitle for Christians is that we'll appreciate it, is The Lying, the Witch, and the War We're In. The Lying, the Witch, and the War We're In. It sounds like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But it's also a film. It's a 75-minute full-length documentary. The 1916 Project comes out in October, streaming on Angel Studios, which is our distribution partner, and on Twitter for 2 weeks, I think, free right before the election. It's a real banger of a film. It's going to rip your face off, shock you, red pill you. I like to say Holy Spirit pill you. You'll realize how much you've been lied to about our culture and the ideas that created this culture. And so that's the beginning of your answer, which is like, how do we trace these ideas? Where did they come from? And that's important because to understand your history helps you understand your current moment, right? Because ideas have consequences, which is actually the name of one of my favorite podcasts. But bad ideas have victims. And bad ideas have victims. So ideology is the hell of a drug. Nature abhors a vacuum. And someone's ideas are going to be ascendant, is what I'm saying. Someone's ideas are going to be the ones that dictate the terms of engagement, that become enconced in legislation. Someone's ideas are going to win and someone's ideas are going to lose. What I'm trying to tell you is that the coexist bumper sticker was always crap, that there was no libertarian utopian dream where everyone's worldview and ideology, we just get along. That's not going to happen. It's never happened. Okay, that's not how human nature works. And so the ideas that built this republic were obviously Christianity. I mean, right, our founding documents, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. By the way, inalienable means like you can't give them and you can't take them away. They come from a higher power. That among these are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's a reason that our founders created an order of rights. An order of rights. The right to liberty and pursuit of happiness, and then of course the Constitution says property, don't mean much. In fact, they mean nothing at all if you can be murdered. So if you have a right to life, then the reverse side of rights is my obligation to not hinder or harm or take away your right. So if I have a right to property, it means you have an obligation not to burn it or steal it, right? If you have a right to life, I have an obligation not to try to kill you, which is not the same thing, by the way, as killing. Okay, like the state, we have like something called capital punishment. Like you actually can rescind your right to life by murdering innocent human beings. You forfeited your right to life because you killed an innocent human being. But what we're saying is that it's always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being without proper justification. An innocent human being. So if we have rights, then those rights have to come from somewhere. Now, of course, the sort of conservative secularist would say, well, they're based on the only thing we have in common, which is what? We're all humans, right? So there's something about being human that makes us more valuable than the chimpanzee and the horse. And what most conservatives would say is that it's our ability to speak and engage in reason and rational thought, right? Yeah. That's what elevates us from the animals. But then you get people like Darwin that come along and say, well, really, human beings are just animals, but maybe slightly more elevated, right? Slightly more rational or capable. But hey, it's all just one continuum. We're all animals, and maybe the chimpanzee is less rational than us as Homo sapiens, but we're all animals. And so it's a dog-eat-dog world. And in the animal kingdom, the strong survive and the weak die. Benjamin, that's what happens in an animal kingdom. Shocker. And so Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, takes his cousin's idea one step further and says, if we need the survival of the fittest, right? By the way, the second half of that book was something like by means of the preservation of favored races. People forget the subtitle of Origin of Species. He literally refers to favored races. Charles Darwin was a rabid, raging white supremacist. If you've ever read like his fuller body of works, like, which is shocking to me because all the like liberals, Benjamin, and the Democrat Party and the liberal establishment and the legacy news news media, and heck, the public education sector. They're all about canceling racism, right? Like, we got to tear down statues of our founding forefathers, right? They say, because they own slaves. Okay, I'm not denying that some of them own slaves, but if you're saying we have to tear down any vestiges of white supremacy, why don't you stop teaching Darwinism in the public schools? Oh, interesting. Right.
Well,
right. Darwin was a raging white supremacist.
Yeah, but if
go ahead,
are you not a speciesist? You're saying racism is wrong. I'm assuming that's what you're getting at. But at the same time, man is better than the animals. So you are a speciesist. So isn't it like concentric circles of where you draw the line between us and them?
Yeah, that's a phrase I'm very familiar with. I've heard Peter Singer use that phrase a lot. That if you elevate the rights and dignity of one kind of species over another, people will say that's morally equivalent to racism or sexism, and they call it speciesism. Yeah. But here's the thing. I think you have to have, and excuse my rhetoric, I think you have to have your head pretty far up your own rectum to believe that. I think at the gut level, Benjamin, people understand the difference between eating a hamburger and eating a Harold burger. I think at the gut level, people know it's okay to eat a hamburger, but you shouldn't eat your friend Harold and put him in a hamburger. Excuse me. Sorry, Adam. So I think I understand the argument. I just think it's asinine and stupid. And I think most liberals who have a problem with, they love PETA and they think it's wrong to eat animals. It's interesting. I rarely see them outside of the drive-thru at In-N-Out and McDonald's complaining about genocide. Because I think at the gut level, we understand that human beings have rights and value and something called intrinsic dignity and intrinsic value that animals do not have. And of course, from a Christian worldview, Benjamin, what Christians would say is that our founding fathers had a right, that we're endowed by our Creator. So Christians believe that we're created in the image of God. And so for that reason, the humans have a value and a dignity, and they have rights that animals simply do not have. And so the response would be, it's not speciesism to recognize that not all beings have the same level of rights, and human beings simply have value and dignity that animals do not have. Okay,
I want to press on this because you're saying that human beings are distinct from animals, right? But human beings aren't distinct from other human beings. Like it's okay to recognize like that we are animals, but we're somehow distinct. So there's a line drawn there, but the line isn't between one race and another race. So how do we make that? What is that founded?
The differences between human beings?
Well, accepting all human beings as this one thing and not animals, even though we function just like animals. We're built out of the same processes that animals run on, right? Blood and
what
sweat.
Processes? Sure.
Just like we're biological organisms. Right. And so there's something in our biology that distinguishes us from animals.
Well, yeah, we're biological organisms.
Yeah.
But human beings in the Christian worldview, which I believe is objectively true, not just because it has value in building a civilization and ensuring that you and I can have this conversation in the first place. Christianity says that we have a soul. That we're an eternal being. C.S. Lewis said, you've never met a mere mortal. You've never met a mere mortal. And so we're not going to see, I don't believe we're going to see every dog that's ever died in heaven again one day. Or in hell, but every human being has an eternal soul and will live forever. They'll either be in hell forever or they'll be in heaven forever. They're actually an eternal being. Okay. And then additionally, human beings, we have this thing we recognize as moral accountability, which is what we were talking about earlier, reason and rational nature that animals don't have. And this is so self-evident. Right, that the phrase our founders use, we hold these truths to be self-evident. It means like axiomatic. It's like there are some truths that should be so obvious to the kind of the rational, hopefully free human, that sometimes human beings almost struggle to find language to articulate things that are taken as first premises. They're taken as self-evident. And here's an example of that. When a lion attacks a child that falls into a zoo cage, we don't drag the lion before a jury and indict him for murder. But when a man kidnaps a child and rapes and murders the child, we do punish him because he should know better. Because you have a moral functioning nature to know that that's wrong. And we all want to see this kind of people punished, right? We all want to see rapists and murderers punished, but we don't expect a lion or a tiger to understand that. That's kind of an example of what I mean, that it's sort of self-evident.
Okay. And thank you for letting me push. I'm not debating. I'm just trying to, I'm just trying to build the argument step by step. So how did we come from, we hold these truths to be self-evident. They invented a liberal order, which decreased violence between different sects of Christianity because Christians were killing each other. So they invented this rational, reasonable protocol for resolving disputes that relied on argument, good faith argument, one hopes, in order rather than just raw power, right? But they still, in that system, they said that there's these individuals. Maybe, I don't know if the Constitution speaks to a soul, but it's pointing to like there's something that we hold self-evident. And they created this system that worked very well, but somehow that system laid the groundwork for what we now regard as abortion, right? Which is deciding that the mother's right to autonomy is more valuable. It's competing rights between the child's autonomy as a person, the child's right to life, and the mother's right to live her life as she sees fit, right? So there's competing rights. And right now we side on the mother, the adult human female, has the right to do as she sees fit. And which I assume you believe is an abomination, but it still comes through the language that was founded in the Constitution or found in the, or maybe not. So how did we get from there to here?
Right. Yes. That you've articulated sort of the liberal or left of center argument for abortion quite well. They see it as competing rights, but eventually they side with the mothers. Right. They believe that her right to bodily autonomy, to use their phrase, which is always, because I always ask, well, when did the child's bodily autonomy begin? Yeah. But they see that as trumping an actual separate human being's right to life. And so, of course, that in summary is probably the best way to articulate the pro-choice position is that, hey, maybe the child does have some kind of right, but the mother's right to reproductive freedom or bodily autonomy or whatever it is always trumps the child's right to life. I appreciate when pro-choice philosophers and thinkers are honest in admitting some of the flaws in their own arguments and reasoning. This might interest you because I can tell you enjoy ideas. Mary Ann Warren is her name, Benjamin. She's an abortion choice philosopher. She wrote a 1984 article called On the Moral and Legal Status of Abortion. And this is super fascinating. I mean, she defends abortion through point of birth, just so I'm clear. So I'm quoting a true radical. Because, by the way, when I say that, I don't mean like by my definition of it. I mean, just look at the polling. A Gallup poll, 2019, only 12% of Americans support abortion through point of birth. Like through the third trimester. Not 12% of Democrats or Republicans, 12% of Americans. So the current Democrat Party's platform position for decades, which has been abortion through point of birth, like just statistically, radically out of touch with most people who would call themselves Democrats or pro-choice. But Mary Ann Warren supports abortion through point of birth, like Peter Singer. And here's what she said. This was a line from her article. She said, the fact that restricting abortion has tragic side effects does not in itself show that the restrictions are unjustified, since murder is wrong, regardless of the consequences of forbidding it. She said, and the appeal to the right to control one's body, she says, which is generally construed as a property right, is at best a rather feeble argument for the permissibility of abortion. She says, mere ownership does not give me the right to kill innocent people whom I find on my property. And indeed, I am apt to be held responsible if such people injure themselves while on my property. She says, it is equally unclear that I have any moral right to expel an innocent person from my property when I know that doing so will result in his death. In other words, she says that the pro-choice strategy of framing it as the mother's bodily autonomy, like property right, this is my body, my property, is not a good argument, she says. That's a bad argument for abortion, because if the pro-lifers are right, that this thing, and if the science shows that this is a human being, then what you're saying is that if you find or happen to find an innocent human being on your property, which you did not consent to enter your property, it doesn't mean that you can murder them on your property or expel them from your property if you know that doing so, doing what? Expelling them from your property will result in their death. She's basically saying, is one of the foremost quoted pro-abortion philosophers on the left, that that's a stupid argument, because if the pro-lifers are right and that's a human being, then that child has a right to life that would actually trump the mother's right to quote unquote property or bodily autonomy. So anyway, I know that was just the beginning of kind of an answer there, but I always like quoting the people who disagree with me, who say, yeah, that's a really stupid asinine argument, and pro-choicers shouldn't use that.
Well, why is property so instrumental in this conversation, even if it's a bad argument? Why do you think it appeals to people so well?
Oh, well, I think a lot of that's probably the fruit of kind of the sexual revolution. I think a part of I think a major premise and belief of the sexual revolution was, well, it was actually so profound that it coined a term that everyone knows. If it feels good, do it. And by the way, right before what we might say is the beginning of the sexual revolution, you had the birth control movement, which Margaret Sanger, whose first clinic was opened in the year 1916, which is why I called my book and film The 1916 Project. She was considered the patron saint of birth control, if you will. She actually coined the term. People forget that. The term, the phrase birth control was invented. It was coined by Margaret Sanger, and I've read a lot of her
writings. It was probably workshopped a little bit. They probably had a
Thank you. I was just about to say
right.
that. Yeah, I've read a lot of her writings on this, on the different phrases they were toying around with at the time. And just to be clear what she meant by that, Benjamin, because the history on this is kind of interesting. She didn't mean, how do we help poor black and brown women plan their parenthood so they can be better parents to the children they already birthed? That's not what she meant. Actually, let me tell you what she meant. Quote, birth control is not contraception thoughtlessly and indiscriminately practiced. Birth control means the cultivation and release of the better racial elements in our society. Yeah. And of the better racial elements in our society, and the cultivation and release of better racial elements in our society, and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extinction of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blossoming of the finest flowers of American civilization, end quote. So that was how Margaret Sanger defined, that was in one of her articles in her own magazine, The Birth Control Review, which I have cited in my film and book with all the citations. That's how she defined birth control. So the birth control movement was part of the eugenics movement. They wanted to use birth control as a way to plan and really control. That's why it's called birth control. Who should be able to have kids and who shouldn't. So just for your listeners who may not know the history behind the birth control movement, it was a bunch of racists and eugenicists that didn't want too many blacks, browns, Italians, Slavs, Jews, and also epileptics, drunkards, criminals, and the mentally and physically disabled to have children. They didn't want them to have kids. That was so you get the birth control movement shortly before the sexual revolution. Well, that's significant. That makes sense if you think about it, because for the first time in human history, by the way, what I'm not saying right now is that any form of birth control is immoral and evil. The Catholics believe that. I actually have a lot of respect for the Catholic position against birth control. I find it quite fascinating, and I think there's a lot to learn from it. But I'm not a Catholic. I'm a Protestant or evangelical Christian. I don't think that using a condom is sin. Okay, but what I'm saying, it's interesting to think about, because for the first time in human history, things are being developed. And of course, people always tried weird forms of birth control hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but it had never been like manufactured at a mass level and made publicly available for the masses in such an easy way. So now for really the first time in human history, you have this whole movement where the focus on being able to have sex without children. Now, listen. I'm not saying that every time you have sex, you should be thinking I have to procreate. But the purpose of sex is procreation. Anyone that says differently is an idiot. Okay, that's literally the telos, right? Teleology. That's literally the purpose of sex is procreation. But now Americans begin to think that we have the right to orgasms without responsibility, because birth control convinced us that we have the right to sex without the possibility of pregnancy. But of course, sex is naturally tied to procreation and pregnancy. So birth control begins to set the stage for the sexual revolution. And Americans, here's the thing, if you're on birth control, you've told yourself, I'm not consenting to pregnancy. So if you get pregnant, you're more likely to abort because you're thinking, I didn't consent to this.
Yeah.
I was on birth control. I'm not ready for this. So again, I'm not saying every form of birth control is immoral or sinful. I'm just saying you have to acknowledge the role it played in the social fabric and in the cultural consciousness that planted the seeds for the sexual revolution and the belief that we have the right to orgasms without responsibility.
Yeah. If the state, well, what's the state's role in this? The state's role in granting or barring women from abortion, the state's role in facilitating the contract, whether consented to or not, that the man has in the situation of a birth, right? Because there's not just this woman, this fetus in this womb, right? And there's not just this woman with this clump of cells. There's also a man involved. And if we're going to talk about moral responsibility, what about the men in this equation, in this social fabric?
Yeah, great point. It's funny when we're at events sometimes, or we're doing activism, or we're on the street somewhere, or I'm at a university campus talking to students before a lecture. The left tries to do this thing. They did this, I think, right when Roe got overturned or right before. And the left thinks they're so clever. They think it's a gotcha for conservatives. And they'll be like, oh, yeah. I think I've seen Whoopi Goldberg do this, too, on The View. And they're like, okay, if abortion should be banned, then men, okay, I'm going to get you, pro-lifer. Men should be forced or mandated legally to provide child support for the kid. I got you, because don't you Republicans want to abort babies too? And every pro-life dude's like, sounds great. I would love to pass legislation to mandate fathers to stay with the women they impregnate and to care for the child. Sounds like a great way to start rebuilding the social fabric. State enforced.
Do we want the state involved in these issues? I mean, and in the absence of the church, who else is going to do it? In the absence of a cohesive community.
Sure. I mean, yeah, of course, we've lost a lot of our social fabric, right, in America. But here's the thing. If the child, here's the pro-life argument.
Okay.
It's always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being without proper justification. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being without proper justification. Therefore, abortion is always wrong. In other words, if your right to life begins the moment you become human, and you become human at the moment of conception, then it's just as wrong to kill a baby in the womb as it is to kill a baby outside the womb. Because our rights and our value don't come from our cognitive abilities or functions. They come from our human nature. And as soon as you open the door to say human rights don't come from human nature, or from your status as a human being.
Yeah.
And of course, to quote the founders in Christianity, it's also that we're image bearers of God and that our value and rights come from God. If that's no longer where they come from, then it's no longer based on your shared human nature. Hey, we're all human, so we all have a right to life. Then it becomes based on functionalism, or the exercise of cognitive abilities that you have in the here and now.
Yeah.
But what that always ends up doing is it plants the seeds of our own destruction. It puts in place the premises that justify our own enslavement or mistreatment as well. Because we can think of examples of born people. Dementia patients, severely cognitively disabled individuals, people in a coma. I mean, there are many examples we can think of where a human being's exercise of consciousness or self-awareness, Benjamin, in some cases would be actually less than the chimpanzees in severely cognitively disabled patients. Mm-hmm. So wait. If our rights don't come from the fact that we're just human beings, and that as long as there is an alive human being, that they still have rights, and it's based on cognitive abilities, well, then there is always an example of a born human being who would fail the new litmus test for personhood. And that will always get expanded, by the way. And so that's why the pro-life argument is that the child has a right to life because they're a human being, not because on how they function or perform in the here and now, but on who and what they are, a human being. Yep. This would be kind of the substance view of persons. So to answer your question about the role of the state involved in these issues, yes. the state exists to protect life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property. So when someone compromises or tries to attack or take any of those rights, that's the role of the government to protect and preserve those things. And so just as I have no respect for Stephen Douglas's arguments on state rights for slavery when he debated Abraham Lincoln in a series of very famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, I also have no respect for the argument that says now that Roe is overturned, states should be able to decide whether unborn babies can be killed in their state or not. Because if you have a right to life, you have it, period. Not in varying degrees or at various seasons. You have it, period. So just as Stephen Douglas was a racist for insinuating that, hey, I'm cool with states deciding whether black men should be enslaved and treated like chattel or not. I also called those ageists who would say that it's okay to kill the baby in the womb because they're younger and we should let every state decide as not just immoral and evil, but anti-American, because our creeds and our founding premises and documents were set up on the belief of the right to life first. And so if the baby is a baby and the baby is a human and humans have a right to life, then there's no California, Oregon, Washington, New Mexico right to kill babies, while Texas and Tennessee and South Dakota decide to protect babies. That's the only consistent position to take.
Let me try to formulate this. So we have a right to life, but does the state have an obligation to enforce our obligations to life if I am in a coma? And I don't particularly like arguing from edge cases, but if I'm in a coma, I don't just have a right to life because I cannot sustain my own life. I'm no longer within like me being able to sustain life. Is my family obligated to keep me alive? You know, if I'm severe, if the baby that I'm about to have is only going to just suffer out of the womb, like really just not going to be able to. Do we just allow nature to take its course and allow that being to go through a year of just terrible existence? Like, who are we to decide? Good point. And is it, I don't see, it's not sufficient to me. If we have a right to life, like, I don't just have a right to life. I rely on my mother for the beginning of my life, my father to get me set up. And then I rely on everybody else working in concert, and I have to step up and have responsibility. But my life isn't just living in a vacuum. None of us live in a vacuum. So this whole notion of rights, it just seems very nebulous without like an understanding of obligations and what is the role of state in an obligation, especially in a citizenry who's lost their moral foundation.
Yeah, I appreciate the nuance, Benjamin. Thanks for bringing those cases up. So the fundamental difference between the status of a severely cognitively disabled individual with brain trauma who's in a coma and who may not awaken in the next year, whose children are footing the bill to keep their mother or father or grandparent on life support, is that person is in a position of no more. Very likely. Whereas the unborn child is in the position of not yet. So that person is in the position of no more. They will probably no more in the future exercise self-awareness, consciousness, and rationality. Now, they're still alive. They're still a human being, right? But the unborn child is not comparable to the coma patient in any way, shape, or form. They are still developing the cortical brain activity and physical development that eventually correlates to the increase in mental functions and self-awareness. Given time, they will realize all those things. Their inability to exercise that thing now doesn't mean that they're less of a person. Now, of course, I would also say that about the person in a coma. Their inability to exercise cognitive abilities now doesn't make them less of a person. However, they very likely, right, will not regain that ability. But the unborn child is not damaged in any way. There's nothing wrong with the baby. They're developing those abilities and will very soon be able to exercise the kind of cognitive abilities that we all eventually will, and that we do attribute to the uniqueness of persons and humans.
Yeah, but that all relies on the mother. Like, the mother maybe did or didn't give consent to the act of sex. Certainly didn't give consent in any sort of rational way to the conception.
I haven't ended the answer.
Okay.
So while removing life support eventually results in the patient's death, that is not the same as elective abortion. Okay? The question at the heart of the coma patient is, should we let them die? The question at the heart of the abortion debate, Benjamin, is not should we let them die, it's can we actively kill them?
Okay.
So let's say, and by the way, I've had 3 grandparents go through this, and I'm watching my 4th grandparent go through this now, okay? I'm not a coma, but dementia, not remembering who people are, attacking, getting violent. You know what I'm saying? It's tragic. It's super difficult to go through. So I've seen this stuff play out. Let's say now that poor grandma, sweet, loving, amazing grandma, who doesn't remember who people are, and now she's gone into a coma. Let's say the family gets together and they decide that they after a year they are gonna, well, the phrase is pull the plug, right, Benjamin? And then grandma is going to die. Okay. Let's say right after you made that decision, okay? It's going to sound a little macabre, but for the purposes of the thought experiment, that's what we're doing here, right, Benjamin? After you and your family make that decision, before the process begins, I sneak into the hospital room and I slit grandma's throat with a box cutter. Now, did I do anything wrong? I think so. I think that's wrong. I think I still violated her rights. And now, I actively killed her. I think I would be charged for murder, actually.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
I murdered grandma. Now, but wait, what you were going to do, just for the purpose of our thought experiment, what you were going to do, Benjamin, was also going to result in grandma's death. So what's the difference? I think anyone listening to this would go, I think I see a difference there, Seth and Benjamin. Right, exactly. Because in one case, you're letting die. You're letting what? You're letting what? A natural, biological, medical process take place that what? This is important, that would have taken place a year prior, absent 20th and 21st century forms of medicine that can keep grandma alive in the first place. Meaning if we were in the 18th century, she would have died a year ago. So you're letting die a process continue that would have happened anyways if we weren't living in 2024. But me going into the hospital room and slitting her throat, I'm actively killing. That's what happens in every abortion. In an abortion, you're not letting die, for goodness sake. You're not letting die. You're actively killing. That's why there's forceps involved. That's why there's vacuum catheter tubes involved. That's why there's the RU486 abortion pill, which cuts off all nutrients to the child by cutting off the hormone progesterone. The baby starves to death over the next 2 days, and then you take misoprostol, and it forces your uterus to have contractions, and you dump the baby in the American sewage system. That's actively killing. That's not letting die, and I think everyone can recognize the differences between those.
Okay, we don't have much time, which is really unfortunate because we're just now getting into the conversation. But
we can do it again.
Yeah, I'll have to have you back on. But what we see now is with the erosion of the meaning of human life as something sacred. Right. And, there's arguments about it, and it went through, there's a whole evolution of ideas around feminism and property rights and liberalism and abortion and all that stuff. But what we see now is the erosion, not just of the woman's capacity to give birth, but our relationship to what a woman is. right? The whole gender thing.
Yeah.
And if you look at what Planned Parenthood is doing, they're not just aborting, they're, actively gelding males and, giving exogenous hormones, cross-sex hormones, so-called.
That's true.
To males and females. So there's no more sacred category of male or female. And then what we have up in Canada, for some strange reason, they're trying to engineer it that people with mental health conditions can electively get no moored by the state. And they call it medically assisted MAID.
Suicide.
It's suicide, right? Yeah. So could you just survey how our stance on abortion does lead to us now offing teenagers with, moody teenagers, offering veterans, out so that the state doesn't have to pony up for their medical bills anymore? Is it of a piece? And what does that say about the mindset that is being manifested?
Yeah, you've touched on an interesting part of our culture war and what I call our culture of death, Benjamin, that a lot of people aren't aware of. Planned Parenthood is not only the largest abortion provider in the world, they're also the second largest provider of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in America. Planned Parenthood's fastest growing revenue stream is now trans drugs for teens. Which, if you know the history behind Planned Parenthood, which I detail very exhaustively in my book, The 1916 Project, with citations and proof for things that will shock you, this shouldn't come as a surprise, because Planned Parenthood wasn't just part of the eugenics movement, they were the eugenics movement. I mean, literally, the executive secretary of the American Eugenics Society in the 20s, Leon Whitney, early 30s, actually. Leon Whitney, who wrote a piece in Sanger's magazine called Selective Sterilization and Urgent Need. So we have to selectively sterilize people. So the people that have bad genes that we don't want reproducing, we're going to go sterilize them.
Well, I mean, the trans thing is just like elective sterilization. You just convince kids to sterilize themselves.
That's what I'm getting to, is I'm saying Planned Parenthood is still in the business of sterilizing people.
Yeah, it's preemptive.
It's all the eugenics
with
movement
a rainbow.
Anyways.
Yeah,
that's right. And Leon Whitney got fan mail from Hitler one day thanking him for his book on eugenics. And Leon Whitney took it over to his boss, Madison Grant, who was the founder and president of the American Eugenics Society. And Madison Grant had once put a black man in a cage with a monkey at the New York City Bronx Zoo to, quote, illustrate evolution. This is what happens when you abandon Christianity and the belief that human beings are created in the image of God and it's just all evolution. Well, then, hey, let's put a black man in a cage with a monkey and just say, here's the process of evolution. I mean, Madison Grant was a demon. And he got fan mail from Hitler, too, for his book, The Passing of the Great Race, which Hitler called his Bible. And I can prove and document all of this. Anyways, Leon Whitney once tried to convince Margaret Sanger to merge her magazine, The Birth Control Review, with the American Eugenics Society's magazine to become the same publication, because Leon Whitney told Margaret Sanger, our goals are the same. So yes, Planned Parenthood wasn't just part of the eugenics movement, they were the eugenics movement, and today they're doing what they've always done, sterilizing people because they believe in quote-unquote overpopulation. That's the beginning of an answer. To your question. A deeper answer would be to understand this old Christian heresy called Gnosticism. Or Gnostic dualism. So Gnosticism was an old Christian heresy. Even the Apostle Paul, in some of the letters in the New Testament, actually spoke out against. And Gnosticism was this belief that your body was a prison for the soul.
But why is that so tenacious? And why is that at the heart of leftish, liberalistic political activity?
There's this old ancient Christian heresy called Gnosticism. Even the Apostle Paul in some of the letters of the New Testament was preaching against Gnosticism. They believe that the physical world can't be trusted. Gnosis, or knowledge, could be found only through the soul. and the metaphysical, spiritual world. And real knowledge, real enlightenment would come from metaphysical realities, which are things you can't see or touch, right? Like you can't see consciousness. You can't see these things. But the Gospels and Christianity declares that the physical world is good. In Genesis, God called it, he said that it was good. In the Old Testament, you see some Hebrew parallelism when it says, when I refused to repent of my sin, my bones wasted away inside. So when I refuse to repent of my sin, which is a metaphysical, spiritual act, the Bible links that with physical pain. My bones ached, I hurt physically inside because I was keeping secret sins and not repenting of them. When mothers nurse, there's oxytocin is released. Well, that's a physical, biological phenomenon, right, Benjamin? Oxytocin has been proven to create a sense of trust. It's called literally the bonding hormone. So there's something metaphysical happening because of biological physical phenomenon. I could give other examples, but that's why we believe that Gnosticism, this belief that the body is of the soul, and the real self, the soul, the authentic identity, the metaphysical self, the consciousness, desires, self-awareness, that the belief that this is the real is a very fallen, dangerous way to view humans because it doesn't reflect reality. And so this old Christian heresy of Gnosticism has really been rebirthed and brought back in the name of quote unquote progress. And so now in the abortion industry, they say the baby may be human, but they're not a person, because they say real persons, the real self, right, are what? Consciousness, self-awareness, and desires. So until the baby is physically developed to have self-awareness, consciousness, and desires, then there may be a human being there, but there's no person there yet because the person is a metaphysical. And until those cognitive abilities can be exercised in the here and now by the baby, then there's just a pound of flesh, but not a person, which is what Roe versus Wade said, that it may be a human, but that doesn't mean that it's a person. So when you abort a baby, believes the left, Benjamin, you don't kill you just dissect a pound of flesh. That's Gnosticism. It's the same ancient heresy that undergirds the transgender rainbow revolution today. I body, they say, right? Trapped in the wrong body, born in the wrong body. What does that mean? That the real self is not biological. Biology provides no clues or pointers to our reality. It's all just random. The real self is what? That metaphysical, cognitive self-awareness, consciousness, who I feel I am on the inside. And a lot of this came from the Enlightenment, right? This belief that that I think, therefore I am. That the real human identity is found in the mind alone. Some of this we get from Plato, some of it we get, but basically that the body is kind of like let's say a man who steps into a Corvette. So the Corvette, the car is the vessel, but you, the driver, are the real person. So our bodies, like I'm looking at you now, Benjamin, I'm actually not looking at Benjamin according to the Gnostics, because you're just a pound of flesh, which is the vessel that the true identity, which I can't see, is operating and around for their purposes. So if that's an accurate account of who persons, then listen to this. Why not take your car to the body shop and make over to reflect the real you, to make the outside feel more like the inside? Now we're at the front door of transgenderism. So notice how this old ancient Christian heresy that was labeled a heresy by the church is actually the fundamental, foundational, operative worldview or belief system that is both the left's celebration and support of abortion and celebration and support of transgenderism. It's both the same belief system, ideology, and I think it's important to say false religion and very dangerous view of human beings that is currently animating every new iteration of the culture of death today, which we could do a whole nother show on together.
Seth Gruber, I'm going to let you go because you got to go. I really appreciated interacting with you. You have a very strong spirit and highly articulate and well-learned. Your book, The 1916 Project, and film, your book's available now. When's the film coming out? In a few weeks here, right?
It comes out in October, and then will be free on Twitter or X in the second half of October.
Okay. I will link that, or everything's crashing now. I'm going to link those in the description, and I'm going to end the recording now. Thank you very much for showing up.
Thank you, Benjamin.